All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Skylar Levine, and I'm a current undergraduate student in the College of Engineering. And today I'm going to be moderating today's session of Industry Insights with Gator grads. Today's Gator graduate is Matt Sobieski. He graduated in the class of 2009, dual majoring in mechanical and aerospace. Uh, he graduated and got some experience with engineering before going into his consulting. To talk a little bit more about that, take it away, Matt.
Right. Thank you very much, Skylar. Looking forward to our conversation today. All right. So I'm going to talk to you a bit today about what and why engineers have what it takes to make great consultants. But before we jump into that, I'm going to give you a kind of a bit of background about myself and then kind of my journey and how I got to where I am today. Hopefully we get some good questions as well. I'm excited to be here and thank you guys for having me. All right. Okay, so originally from Florida, I was born and raised in Melbourne, so on the East Coast. Lived in Florida my whole life. Went to the University of Florida, as you guys know. Couldn't decide which degree to take, so I got my aerospace and mechanical engineering degree in 2009. While I was on campus, was an engineering ambassador. Was also heavily involved in Engineers Week, and was an E-Week director. I think I led one of the events the previous year. Did some stuff outside of the engineering college as well. So I was part of Gatorship, which is a kind of leadership and diversity retreat. I also went and got my MBA at Emory's Goizueta Business School here in Atlanta, which is the city I currently live in. And since I've graduated, I've spent a lot of time in manufacturing. So I'll talk a bit about my work history as well. But happy to talk about lean manufacturing, operations, quality, kind of leadership development and capability building as well. And I'll have contact information at the end if anyone has more questions or wants to talk about it further. So I had a bit of an unconventional path from undergrad to today, but I actually think it's more conventional than you might realize. While I was in school, I had a couple of internships kind of highlighted there on the right. So small engineering company, always wanted to work with airplanes. And so I was fortunate enough to get an internship with Boeing out in Seattle. And then I finished up at GE Energy in 2008. And so I learned a lot in my college internships. In particular, had some very kind of heavily engineering focused internships. And then I also had some more operations manufacturing type. Particularly when I was at Boeing, I spent a lot of time on the manufacturing floor, and I just got really excited about doing that stuff. So when I graduated from UF, joined Lockheed Martin and their operations leadership development program. And so I did that for a couple of years, started out in Washington, D.C., and then moved down to Atlanta and joined as a quality engineer on their C-130 program. So I got to spend a lot of time on the shop floor, making sure that parts were put together correctly, troubleshooting issues, doing root cause analysis. And that's actually when I started my MBA as well. So I was going to school at night while I was working during the day. I did a brief stint at a tier one supplier for Boeing and Airbus as well, before actually transitioning over to financial services. So a lot of people have asked me, well, how did you make a switch from a company like Lockheed Martin to a company like Equifax, which is a major credit bureau based here in Atlanta? Well, the reality is that I was in ops doing manufacturing type work, and it's actually quite translatable to other types of industries. And so I was in an operations planning role. And instead of putting parts together on an airplane, it was call centers and making sure that packages of data got delivered and things like that. And so it was quite relevant. And it was a great jumping off point from finishing my MBA to kind of pivot to a different industry. When I was just out of college, I was really excited about kind of career growth and leadership roles. And a lot of that was fueled by my time at UF when I was in, I was in roles like E-Week director and stuff. I just loved kind of the leadership stuff. And so I felt like my career wasn't progressing that quickly on the manufacturing side and engineering organization. So I said, I'm going to try something different. So I moved over and was able to actually lead some teams through a couple of roles at Equifax. Kind of towards the end of my time there, I was sitting on a panel talking about quality, and I met somebody who works at McKinsey, and I McKinsey's not something that I kind of ever really knew about when I was in undergrad. It's not something, management consulting in general, I learned a little bit about it in my MBA, but it really wasn't something I had ever considered, and had a really good conversation with this gentleman who encouraged me to join. And I went through the interview process and have been at McKinsey since 2019. And so it's been just a ton of fun. And I do a lot of work in manufacturing transformations. So if you look at my whole career progression, early on, I spent time on the shop floor, and that's just what I get excited about. And it's almost more of industrial engineering type work in some ways, but at the same time, so much of my mechanical and aerospace background is really, really relevant. I was just at a company not that long ago that was forging parts, and I knew a lot about kind of why you could hot forge and cold forge and the different constraints around that, which is absolutely stuff I learned with my mechanical engineering degree, and not something I would have learned had I taken a different path. And so even today, being a number of years outside of UF and in a completely different environment, I find that my engineering degree is really relevant. And we'll talk about that further. So what I'm going to do now is talk a bit about McKinsey, because some of you may know what McKinsey is and some of you may not. So McKinsey is a management consulting company, and I'm giving you here a little bit of background, but it's actually quite large. So there's about 30,000 colleagues in 130 cities and 65 countries. So it's based here in the US, but truly a worldwide organization. Founded by James McKinsey, who is a University of Chicago professor about almost 100 years ago. And he really kind of pioneered this kind of industry of management consulting. And one of the things that is really foundational to who we are as McKinsey, and not only just making sure that our clients have meaningful change and we make a difference, but we also take our obligation to dissent really seriously. And so you might say, well, what is an obligation to dissent, right? For us, it's if you see something that's wrong or you disagree or you think there's a better way to do something, it's your obligation to raise your hand and say, hey, I think we can do something different. I think we can do something better. And it's a very, very important component of our quality. And it also kind of strengthens our kind of fundamental, I guess, approach to solving problems, right? And so we want to make sure that everybody's idea is heard and that everybody's perspective is valued. And so I really like that about McKinsey. I want to talk a bit about company values as well. This may seem kind of administrative, but I think it's really, really important. And I'll share this with you because of all the different companies that I've worked in at internships and kind of in my career post that. I didn't realize it until kind of moving through my career, but what a company's values are really, really important as far as how they make decisions and how your role is impacted on an everyday basis. So it may not seem like it, right? But if a company says, look, our number one value is returning money to the shareholders versus our number one value is taking care of customers, it actually affects how the decisions are made in that business. And so you might find that a company prioritizes returns to their shareholders instead of actually taking care of their clients. And honestly, without customers, you really wouldn't have your company, right? And so I wanted to share this because it's a big part of McKinsey, and it's a big part of as you are going through your career, when you're thinking about companies that you want to work for and with, it's really critical that you understand this and that you know what their mission is, you know what their purpose is, you know where their values are. And so McKinsey's purpose is to create a positive, enduring change in the world. And I know that sounds kind of really big picture, but that's really what we do every day. We want to make sure we're coming in and making a difference in people's lives. And our mission is to do that in distinctive, lasting improvements in a company's performance. And while at the same time, we want to make sure we attract, develop, and retain really, really exceptional people. And to do that, we value really, we adhere ourselves to the highest professional standards, right? And that goes back to that obligation to dissent. We focus on making sure our clients improve, and we also prioritize people development. And we make sure that our employees feel valued and feel respected and feel like they can achieve their greatest potential. So, been talking a lot about McKinsey. Let's actually dive into what consultants do and why I think engineers make great consultants. First and foremost, we help our clients solve problems through critical thinking and creativity. And every single engineer has those two skill sets in their playbook. I mean, you have to think critically. You have to be able to break down complex problems as an engineer. And that's what I do as a consultant every day. You also have to apply creative solutions. You have to think outside the box. You have to push the boundaries and you have to try new things. And that's exactly what we do as engineers, right? We push the boundaries, we push the envelope. We try things that haven't been tried before. And both of those skill sets combined are fundamental to being an engineer and also fundamental to being a consultant. So I'll talk about three scenarios here of what a management consultant would do and why you'd hire McKinsey to come help your company. And so I made up these scenarios. They may look similar to scenarios that I've encountered as a consultant, but they're kind of to demonstrate here. So one is you might hire McKinsey because of you need some functional expertise. So maybe you're a company that you're acquiring a competitor, right? So it's not the first time you've done it, but maybe you haven't ever done it at this scale. And maybe you don't have the expertise in-house to do it confidently, right? Maybe you're concerned you might make some mistakes. So that might be an example where you'd hire in somebody like McKinsey and say, hey, I want some expertise. How can you help us make sure that this thing goes well and that we do it right? Objective opinions. So you're a fast food restaurant and you're trying to expand into a new region and you haven't done it before. So you've got a lot of smart people in your organization. You've done an analysis, you figured out what it's going to cost and how to market it, but it's a lot of money and it's a big investment. So you might say, I'm going to hire McKinsey to come in and give me to do this analysis as well and give me a second opinion and do it from an objective lens to make sure that I didn't forget anything. I thought about it holistically, all of that stuff. Last scenario would be, hey, contributing brain power. And what I mean by that is you might be in a situation like a manufacturing company where you're struggling to ramp from early stage of production to like steady state. And you've got a whole bunch of deliveries coming up and you have a whole bunch of people tied up and they can't figure out how to get out of this hole, right? You can have a team like McKinsey implementation come in and help substantially with prioritization, give you some extra kind of boots on the ground, brain power, all that stuff to help you kind of focus on what's important, prioritize, and move out of that phase, right? So for myself as a consultant, I've been in a lot of these situations. Typically, what my day looks like is I'll work with a client and they'll have a set of objectives, right? So it might be a manufacturing plant, and I do a lot of work in manufacturing transformations where the plant might be underperforming, or they might be losing money, or they might be missing deliveries, whatever it may be. And so I'll help them come in and I'll bring a fresh set of eyes and a fresh perspective. And I'll ask questions. And we also have a depth of expertise that we can leverage at McKinsey. And I will help try to identify what some of those problems are and then solutions. And not just identify the solutions, but as an implementation consultant, help them actually execute it, right? So it might mean that I join their stand-up meeting every morning and I'm helping ask critical questions and helping them prioritize. I might join, kind of a meeting where they're figuring out they've got 3 projects and they know that they all need to be done. How do we sequence them? How do we allocate the right resources? How do we not bite off more than we can chew? And so it's a lot of that. We get really kind of in depth with our clients and help them solve their problems and do it in a way that we can absolutely deliver value and make sure that they achieve their goals. One thing I wanted to share, which I think is to kind of finish the piece about consulting is there's a lot of different types of consultants, but I spend my time in implementation consulting. And typically somebody like myself who's had a career before coming to consulting, very different than, say, coming right out of undergrad or right out of grad school to be a consultant. I have worked in industry before, and so my experience is directly applicable to being an implementation consultant. And I spend a lot of my time solving problems with clients in this framework here. So if a business is struggling, or a manufacturing plant struggling, or production line, you name it, we look for these three things coming together, right? So you have your management infrastructure, your technical system, and your mindsets and behaviors. So when I think about management infrastructure, I think about your operating system as a whole, right? Do you have like processes in place? Do you have systems in place? Are you measuring the right things? Does everybody have a clear job description? Do they know what they're doing? Do you have the right visual management on the production floor? Do you have daily stand-up meetings? All of that stuff, like the heartbeat of your business, right? All the pieces that are in place. And sometimes I go into facilities and they don't have that, right? And so my job would be to help them stand that stuff up. And there's been many situations where I've come into a client and I said, I'm going to do morning stand-up meetings with you because you don't have them and you should have them. And that's really important to making sure you know what's going on in your factory that day and what challenges you have and where you need to prioritize. On the technical system side, right, some clients may not have kind of the physical pieces in place to do what they need, right? So they might have labor that's focusing on the wrong thing, right? So you might have 10 people on a production line when you only need 5, and those 10 people are working really, really inefficiently. Maybe they don't have their job, maybe they don't have kind of a standard set of instructions that they're following, right? Maybe they're not working with their team, say, to get parts in on time. So the technical system around producing something, spend a lot of time there. And then the last thing is kind of the soft skills, right? The mindsets and behaviors. So that's the way that people think and feel and conduct themselves in the workplace, right? So if you don't have clear objectives, an aligned mission statement, vision as an organization, and you don't have your leadership team lined up in the same way, you're not role modeling the right behavior, you're not thinking about the right things, that can impact your ability to actually make a difference on, and operate as a whole. So these three pieces, the management infrastructure, the technical systems, and the mindsets and the behavior, kind of all work together. And this is pretty universal across any company. So when you go out to that first job as an engineer, right, and assuming you're doing that and not a consultant, right, if you find yourself in an environment that may or may not be working well, or you feel like it could be optimized, or you could be doing things more efficiently, this is a really good way to think about it, right? So you might be set up for success in some ways, and you might have gaps in other ways. And there's a lot of real life examples, right, that we can see. You think about businesses that may have not innovated and aren't around anymore. There's a good chance they didn't have one of these things in place, and so that kind of affected their ability to innovate, right? Think about like the Blockbusters of the world that aren't around because Netflix came in, right? And so, Netflix came in and disrupted, and maybe they didn't have the right kind of mindset and behavior to adapt to a new competitor, right? Maybe they didn't kind of prioritize the right things. And so, they said, no, we got a good thing going. We don't need to worry about this competitor, right? But they didn't think about things in the right way. There's lots of businesses that happens to, and there are a lot of facilities that risk being shut down because they don't have these pieces in place. And so as a consultant, that's a lot of what I do. A client will hire McKinsey to come in and solve a problem, and it can be any number of problems. As an engineer and as somebody who focuses on manufacturing, I spend a lot of my time in manufacturing plants, and they often have very similar challenges, right? And it's a lot of the flavors of the things we talked about already. It's production lines that are not meeting the output that are required. It's missing deliveries. It's we can't find parts. Our suppliers aren't bringing in the parts that we need, or things of that nature. So I find it to be very exciting and very dynamic. Since I've been at McKinsey, I also work in a variety of different industries. I spend a lot of my time in our AI practice, which is called Advanced Industries. So it's a lot of heavy manufacturing. And I've seen things from automotive suppliers, aircraft final assembly. I've done fiber optic cable. I was actually at a paper mill last year. So any number of things. And so you find that this skill set, this set of tools are actually quite relevant beyond any one single industry. So that's kind of the bulk of the content I wanted to cover today. I'm sure there's questions out there, but I wanted to kind of leave you with, there are some great resources out there if you want to learn more about McKinsey, what it's like to be a consultant, and what we do. We're on LinkedIn and of course on our McKinsey career website. There's a lot of great information and resources out there. There's often wonderful things on LinkedIn. You can see that the type of work we do. I focused here on a lot of the manufacturing stuff, but we do things all over the world in all different industries. We do stuff in private sector and public sector, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. So eager to answer questions that you may have.
Yeah, so just like Matt said, it's Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask them, and yeah, Matt will be answering. Um, First question for you, Matt. What roles do diversity and equity play in your daily job at McKinsey globally?
That's a really good question, right? Diversity is really important, and I know a lot of companies will say that, and it's a priority. Diversity is something that's celebrated at McKinsey, not just like the physical attributes that you see, right? But like diversity of thought and perspective. And so I work on a lot of cross-functional teams, and sometimes I'm the only engineer. Sometimes I might be in a room full of engineers. Sometimes I'm, the only person that's an experienced hire. Sometimes I'm, there's a team of them. So it's really important, and certainly in a place like McKinsey, that everybody brings their whole self and their whole perspective. And that ties back to like our obligation to dissent, is that everybody's opinion and perspective is important and valued, and it's a level playing field for us here. And so that sort of diversity inclusion, it doesn't extends kind of far beyond the client work that we do too, but also into our hiring, right? We have a very, very diverse company, and we have people that come in from sort of all walks of life and all stages of life. And it's something that we absolutely celebrate. There's also a lot of affinity groups in McKinsey, these kind of organizations that cater to kind of different demographics of folks, and they form these communities kind of where people can come together and celebrate, and it's great. I mean, and I think that's certainly something that is a core part of McKinsey. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think you nailed it.
All right.
Another one is, do you have any tips for non-leadership role employees to make an impact by managing up?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I'm trying to reflect back on my time, because I struggled with that early on, and it's something that honestly you'll probably hear a lot early in your career, right? Oh, manage up, manage up. How do you influence without authority, kind of thing. There's certainly techniques that can be employed there. I think one is if you can build a fact base and you can bring data, that's really important, right? We spend a lot of time as consultants doing that. We're constantly building a fact base, because if you have data and you present it, right, nobody can argue with that. And as engineers, we do that, right? We have to go and get the data to support our findings. I think the second thing is, asking questions is actually really powerful. So instead of coming to your boss and saying, "Hey, I think you're wrong, and here's all the reasons why," if you can ask a question like, "Hey, why did you approach it this way?" Or, "Hey, have you thought about this?" Or, "Hey, have you taken this person's opinion into consideration?" Any number of things, right? But it's all about your approach, and knowing that, and understanding your audience goes a long way. Because if you just come in with guns blazing, right, people are often not going to be quite responsive to that. And it's likely that if somebody's already has their mind made up, they're just going to dig in further. The other piece of advice I'll give you is, you have to know when it's just time to leave. And that's not always easy, but I have been in roles where I just didn't see eye to eye with my boss, and I tried, and I, tried for a year or 18 months. And at some point you have to realize that, maybe not the right fit, or maybe your leader is just not going to be supportive, and it's kind of constraining your ability to be successful and achieve your full potential. The best thing to do is try to get ahead of that from the beginning. It doesn't always work like that. One of my roles at Equifax, I had a great opportunity where I joined, and then actually had a new boss that came in, right? So you can do all the prep in the world, and you can do all the research and find this person that you're going to work with that you absolutely love, and then they get a promotion and they can leave. And that's something that happens all day long. And good people, especially if you find a really good manager that you like, somebody that's going, progressing in their career, they're not going to stay in one place for a long time.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So another question is, artificial intelligence is booming right now, especially at UF. What experiences do you have with AI, and what do you see as the future of AI?
That is a great question. We so unfortunately, I don't do a lot in manufacturing with AI, because a lot of what I do is we're in old factories, or factories that have been around for a while, that are trying to kind of improve. So there's a lot of kind of bad to good versus good to great. I will say robotics is really, really important. And there are a lot of plants that I go to where there's kind of robots that are used for anything from welding, stamping, installations, things like that. And you're replacing kind of a person that would do that job with a robot, but then the robot needs to be supported by someone with an engineering degree who understands how to program that robot and understand the constraints and things like that. And so I actually find a lot of my clients that I work with, you're seeing that shift, and they're investing in that technology. And I just picked on robots, right? Because it's probably the thing I encounter the most in manufacturing. But we have a whole kind of team of people that is thinking about manufacturing 4.0 and digitizing and the Internet of Things. And our clients are also kind of struggling with that, and how to do it and how to implement it. The biggest barrier for many of these companies is cost, right? Is how do you justify, making a capital expenditure to purchase some automation tool to improve kind of the performance in a factory, when you have, say, an operating process that's working fine today, right? If you can install a robot for $30,000 to $50,000, and that's the price of a person that is doing that job, the payback's there, right? But if you're trying to do a really incredible automation, say, installation, and there just isn't that, it's the return on investment isn't there. That's a hard thing, I think, for some of our clients to do. So I think it's very industry specific and dependent, but it's certainly something that our clients are thinking about, and McKinsey's thinking about, because we are trying to help our clients be at the forefront of that. And it's, especially today, it's very, very important to be thinking about the future and where we're going. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I think you did pretty well.
All right, good.
Another one is your internships and career steps. They help prepare you for your current role, right? What would you change in the MAE curriculum to give graduates better preparation for the domains that you've worked in?
That's a tough one. So I actually think internships just are a really important part of the curriculum. And so I'll say two things here. One is that I think if you plan to go into industry, it's really critical to have an internship, because there's no substitute for that real life experience. And I think it actually complements the curriculum in school actually quite nicely. Because you get to go and actually apply the things that you are learning in school in industry. And if you go and become an engineer, and that's a career path that you just take, right? You're just an engineer throughout your whole career. I mean, we're all engineers, right? You never are not an engineer once you have an engineering degree. But if you do an engineering type role for your whole career, I think that's the best thing you can do, is get that real life work experience, because that's what the majority of engineering grads will go and do, right? Is they'll be out there and they'll work. But I do think something that's really important is leadership development. I find that many engineers are really great critical thinkers, and they have often the best ideas in the room, but they don't always know how to communicate it. And they aren't necessarily the loudest voice. And we've seen that throughout history of where that's kind of failed us, right? You think about like the space program and like Challenger, right? In 1986, like before many of us are born, right? But you had engineers who were like, hey, this is not a good idea. We have the data and we don't think that we should launch. And, and then they were overridden by, forces beyond their control, right? Political pressure, you name it, right? I think that being able to communicate your ideas effectively and to be able to take a leadership role and feel confident in that presenting is really, really important. And I'd love to see more of that in the MAU curriculum. And that's why I'm doing things like this and trying to get more involved in the college, because I think that's really critical. I think engineers are oftentimes underappreciated for their contributions, and it's because they aren't able to communicate it in the ways that they need to get the recognition and the attention that they deserve. I was able to solve for that a bit through extracurriculars on campus, because I was taking on leadership roles, say like in Engineered Week, and I was as an engineering ambassador giving tours of the campus, right? So being able to practice my public speaking and things like that. Again, that's not necessarily part of the curriculum. It's just something that I've done. So more of that in our engineering curriculum, I think, will prepare engineers for jobs in industry.
Now, you've stressed, or not even stressed, but you've talked about leadership a lot, and obviously you have a lot of experience, as you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that leadership skills are something that is applicable and useful to everybody universally, or do you think there's only certain people that will sort of benefit from those leadership skills?
Absolutely. I think leadership is important for every single person. Leadership skills don't just apply to like the CEO or the manager. I mean, leadership is so much more about that, right? It's about acting with integrity. It's about leading by example, communicating effectively, mentoring, coaching, inspiring. And we should all have opportunities to do that throughout our careers and lives in every single role that we play, right? If you're a first year out of college engineering grad, right? And you come back and you spend time on campus and you're a mentor for someone who's an undergrad, you could be at the lowest level of your company and you're still a leader, because you're taking that, you're demonstrating leadership experience and you're playing a leadership role, right? Anytime you're mentoring, anytime you're coaching someone, I think it's universal and it's critical for every person in every role. And I think it becomes even more critical as your span of influence grows. So the further you are into your career, the more people you have that look up to you, the more people you have in your organization, the more critical it is. So it's never too early to start. And it's never too early to practice. I'll also say a critical part of that's mentors. I learned so much from people that I worked with who made mistakes before me and said, hey, Matt, I learned this the hard way. Don't do this. Or you should try this differently, or you should think about this because it's not going to get the desired result. That's really fundamental. And I encourage you to give back too. And leaders give back, right? So find those opportunities to be a mentor for someone, to be a coach, to volunteer, to do whatever it is, because that's leadership. And that's so, so important.
Beautiful. As a follow-up, just as you're just speaking about mentorship, it's very important that leaders, apply their knowledge, or pass down their knowledge, and be a mentor, like you just said. But how would you suggest people who might not know the routes of finding a mentor find one, as opposed to outside of just going into the industry and having someone above you giving you advice? What sort of mentorship opportunities do you think are available?
Sure. Networking is really important to that. I'm going to say this, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to send me messages, but LinkedIn actually is like a really great way to do it, right? So find someone who has something in common with you. I actually have done that to folks where I said, look, I looked at your career path. It seems interesting. We have these things in common. Can I learn from you? I mean, we do that at McKinsey every day. McKinsey has an internal system where you can look at people's bios, you can look at their work experience, where they focus. And I do a lot of cold calling to people. Hey, you do work in this industry, in this space. I want to learn from you because it seems like we have a lot in common, and I don't know anything about what you do. So, can I talk to you? Uh, I think being a little bit bold there and reaching out, but being clear on what you want, right, is important. Say, hey, and it also has to be kind of organic too. You might find that you reach out to people and you talk to them, and maybe there isn't any chemistry there, and that's okay, right? Not everybody's going to be your mentor, and not every mentoring relationship will have that spark and will last. But then there are some people who you just click with. I've got some folks, like there's one of the individuals I used to work with, who's my boss for a period of time. Just I had natural chemistry with him, and we just kind of have kept in touch for probably 5 or 6 years now. And I ask him all the time for advice on professional moves, ways to think about conflict at work, all sorts of situations. So you never know where you'll find them. They can happen in the most unlikely place. For folks like in undergrad, I think, or nearing kind of the end of college, right? Many companies will have like mentor programs. Take advantage of them when you start. Um, if you have colleagues of yours that were a year or two ahead of you that are graduated and out in industry, like send them a note, learn about what they do, ask if you can set up some time, grab coffee with them. I know it's harder sometimes during the pandemic to do those in-person things, but it it doesn't hurt to ask. And I say be proactive. The mentor-mentee relationship, a lot of it is on the mentee to take the first step, because mentors are probably going to be busier. They're going to have more demands on their time. They're going to be a little bit older, but not necessarily, right? Maybe you can look for mentors that just have more experience than you in a different place, not necessarily older than you, right? I have mentors at McKinsey who are younger than me in age, but they've been at McKinsey for longer. So that's more important in the context of what I need in a mentor. But you have to drive that relationship as the mentee. So you have to be proactive. You have to take advantage of it, and you have to be the one that says, I'm going to schedule 15 minutes with you because I have this thing I want to talk about. So yeah, that's kind of my covered a lot of mentoring advice, but that's what I'd suggest for you.
Yeah, no, you answered it beautifully. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a lot of insight. Another question. What would your advice be for a student who had an internship in a specific engineering role, but wants to obtain a full-time job in a different area?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. Because I was in that exact same situation. My internship at GE that I had in 2008 was the year before I graduated. I hated it, honestly. It was just, and it wasn't because of the company. It wasn't because of the people. It was just the role. I just didn't get excited about that work. And I was like, man, did I make the wrong decision? And here I am 4 years into an engineering degree, and I just did like my first real engineering job. And I was like, man, I didn't like it. Um, that's okay, because there were a lot of things that just weren't right about it. It wasn't a good fit for me. And so I actually worked hard through networking, and you'll see that common theme, but I tried to do a bunch of research on other companies. And I was like, okay, I worked at Boeing and I really liked them and had fun there, but I didn't necessarily want to live in Seattle. And so I talked to a couple people there, but I was like, what other companies do this kind of work? But maybe I have different locations, or maybe I have a better chance of, kind of finding a position there. When I was at GE, I also learned a lot about leadership programs. So I looked for companies that did that. And then once I found those people, I actually worked with the Career Center at UF, and I worked with some kind of, actually, I think some folks in the engineering college that I had built relationships with because I had been, an engineering ambassadors. And I found a way to network with someone who worked at Lockheed Martin, who is a recruiter, and had a great conversation with him and learned about the opportunities. And then, said, what does it take to get an interview? And being as bold as that was, I think, what opened the door to get an interview. So sometimes as simple as asking the question is what will get you that. And so for me, to summarize it, I was kind of in the same situation because I was almost panicking, like, oh my gosh, I don't know that I don't really have a job, right? Because usually internships will lead to full-time hires, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm not sure where I want to work. But I think putting your priorities down, thinking about what's important to you, and then just taking those steps to go and find that person that you can talk to. I mean, it sounds really simple when I did it, right? But it's certainly effort and it takes time. And I'm going to put in a plug for the thing I talked about earlier. When you're thinking about companies, make sure you understand their values. Make sure that you do your research before you even have that conversation. Make sure that what they prioritize and what they value lines with what you prioritize and value. Otherwise, there's a good chance that you won't be happy.
Awesome. As another question is, how do you self-assess how happy you are with yourself or with a current role? It's often hard to realize that it's time to move on from what seems to be a great situation.
Sure. So McKinsey makes it really easy because our work is project based. And so I have a natural inflection point every couple of weeks or months when a project ends, and I can step back and say, okay, how did that go? What do I want to do next? Am I still happy? Do I still enjoy this? Um, it's hard when you leave college because in college you have natural semesters. And so you can pause and you get a break and you disconnect for a week or two and you can reset on your priorities. And it's sort of like a new beginning. I like that in my rotation program as well because I went from 3 to 4 month semesters to like 6 month rotations. But then once you start that first job, nobody ever tells you it's time for a new one. You just kind of work in it until you do something different because it's on you. It's your career. I would challenge you to use, say, like the page turn on the calendar as a natural inflection point for you to reflect on what you're doing. Mental health is really important, especially during COVID right now. With all the virtual, there's a lot of Zoom fatigue going on, and people don't know what they don't know. So they might actually be like very unhappy and just don't really have never taken a step back to like reflect on that. I think work anniversaries are really good. Sometimes, I mean, calendar year, there's a reason January 1st, everyone puts their New Year's resolutions out. So you have to find that natural time and put it in your calendar, schedule it. I know I started with McKinsey on June 14th, and so every June 14th for me, and there's a note in my calendar, one to celebrate an anniversary, but two to just have sort of a state of the union with myself and say, hey, Matt, are you still enjoying what you're doing? Are you still happy? Do you still feel valued? Or does the company still provide you the things that you were looking for in an employer? Do your values still line up with the values of the company? And then what do you want to do next? So you have to find the thing that works for you. There's no one right way to do it, but I find that works, and don't do it any less frequently than a year, right? So at a minimum on your service anniversary, that's a great time to reflect and make sure that you're happy with your role, you're happy with your company, and it doesn't need to be the day you started. It can be the day you started in that particular role. But yeah, make sure you do that and take care of yourself because that's really important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know you touched on this one, but what specific factors influenced you to transition from more of the traditional engineering roles to operations and consulting roles?
Sure. So I was really excited to lead and I wanted to lead teams. And I found that in the defense industry, in the roles that I was in, career progression was just slower. Or maybe I was just being younger and impatient. I don't know. But to me, it felt like I was working for people who sort of had spent a long time in industry and I feel like kept giving me advice like, well, you just need a couple more years in this role. You just need a couple more years. And then I was going to school at night and I was learning about things in business school and I was watching some of my managers do things that were like contradicting the things that I was learning in business school. And I was like, man, I feel like I could do this job and probably do it more effectively. And I just tried and I wasn't getting the career progression that I wanted. So I actually felt like I could pivot to a different industry and see if I could progress my career faster. It was all in the realm of job satisfaction and wanting to do what I wanted to do. And that's kind of what pushed me over into that realm. Then I was able to do that at Equifax, and I realized that the management was fun, and I really enjoyed mentoring and coaching people, but the work didn't excite me. And so that's kind of what got me back to consulting. So you're going to find through your careers that you're going to bounce back and forth, and you're going to solve for different things in different positions. And just because that was my path doesn't mean that that's your path, but that's sort of what got me to do those sort of things. I had a goal of career progression and naturally salary progression as well, right? Because I said, oh, my bosses were making more money than me and they had more responsibility and I felt like I could do the job. That's what I wanted to do. And so I kind of followed that And then in consulting for me, I get that sort of mentoring and coaching, and I get to do that on teams, but also I get to work in manufacturing. And honestly, I missed wearing steel-toed boots and safety glasses and being on a shop floor. And when I was at Equifax, I didn't do a lot of that. And so coming back to McKinsey allowed me to do time in manufacturing, which is it's just what I love. I mean, as an engineer, it's cool to design this stuff, and I think it's even cooler to make it. And it's just, there's no substitute for being on a factory floor and just like seeing stuff that engineers have designed and knowing that you know how it's made. And it's I find it very rewarding.
So actually, I was going to ask that as a follow-up, but you kind of hit it just at the end. Is there anything, or if there is anything, um, could you tell us about what you find rewarding about consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. So not only do I find the in-person going to the shop floor rewarding, but I find it very personally satisfying to make a meaningful difference in a company and to do it as quickly as we do in consulting, right? So I've been in manufacturing facilities where they were losing money and we were essentially saving the company. Like we were helping them figure out how to reduce cost and keep the facility open, right? And so there was one client I worked on where they were pretty much the only company that was in that town. And so they had a choice. They didn't really have a choice. It was kind of like they were losing money and they were going to shut down. And so their last ditch attempt to stay open was we're going to hire McKinsey to help us. And we identified some really cool opportunities for them to save cost. And it wasn't firing a bunch of people. It was you're doing some things really inefficiently. You're using your resources poorly. You're not scheduling things in the right way. And we actually were able to turn that around and help them become profitable. And we saved like hundreds of jobs in a town. Like, how cool is that? I find that very rewarding. There was another plant I worked in where they had issues because they were doing a lot of changeovers and they were running batches of material. And we got there, identified this, helped them refine their scheduling process. And on the third week, 3 weeks of us being there, they set a plant record for production in a single day. And like, how cool is that? I mean, I know because of what I did with two other people, we changed the way this plant operated and we helped them set a plant record. The plant had been open for 50 years and they set a record on this equipment. Like, amazing, right? So that gives me a ton of satisfaction. And I think the speed at which we do things and the kind of industries that we're in and the differences that we make in people's individual lives. And by the way, coaching and upskilling is a really important part of it. I've trained managers, plant managers, had really frank conversations with them, about their performance and like the KPIs they were looking at and challenged them to think things differently. And then you go and see them do that in a meeting and then you watch the performance of the plant improve. It's extremely rewarding, very satisfying. And that happens in just about everything that we do. Now I'm giving you a very manufacturing centric lens, but we do that with clients in all industries.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Um, Sort of as a follow-up to that, as I know you kind of get close to it again, but what have been your most and least enjoyable projects at McKinsey,
Hmm.
if you could pick?
I probably just highlighted some of my most enjoyable ones. I've liked all of them. The kind of least enjoyable one I had was probably one I did like on procurement, which is purchasing, and it wasn't because the work was bad. It just wasn't terribly exciting for me. A procurement opportunity is often, hey, you're buying a bunch of stuff at high costs. Can you run negotiations and reduce some of that? Can you consolidate vendors? Can you just reduce your spend base by making your purchasing processes more efficient? I just didn't really get that excited about it. So I'd say that's kind of like one of my worst. One of my best, let's see, I've seen some really cool factories. The one where we kind of hit the plant record was pretty neat. I haven't had a chance to do this, but I actually have some colleagues of mine who worked at an ice cream plant and they got to eat ice cream every day, which I think is really cool. Some of those like work perks you don't really, they come through and you don't really get to talk about them too much. But I would say, yeah, like the ones where I make the biggest difference have been kind of like the most rewarding for me. So I know that I think I touched on a few of them.
Yeah, you mentioned the ones you highlighted on the previous question. Yeah, you did
Yeah,
that very thoroughly.
yeah,
I like the ice cream. That's a, a big thumbs up.
yeah.
Um,
Then the guy that did ice cream also had a cookie client as well. So you got to watch your waistline when you're traveling to those plants, and you get to eat all the rejected cookies and ice cream.
absolutely. You can convince a lot of people to go into consulting.
Yeah, exactly.
So I see that you leverage your industry experiences to succeed in your current role. What is your opinion on engineering students who would like to join a consulting firm, right after graduation? And also, are there often internship opportunities for engineering students in consulting?
Sure, definitely. So to answer the question, I would say, I mean, coming from my lens, I actually really value my experience, and I think there are benefits to joining consulting right out of school, but I also think it's really cool when you can do it a bit later in your career. That's just kind of my perspective. We have a lot of folks that come right out of undergrad. The challenge with that is if you've only ever done consulting, then McKinsey's a pretty unique place. The way that we work, the way that our projects are structured, it's not really like industry. And so I've heard people that go back to industry may struggle a bit or not really kind of, yeah, because you've just never really been in a quote unquote normal job, if you will. But a bulk, I mean, many of our, I don't know what the ratio is, but many of our folks that join have come from undergrad or have come right from grad school. So maybe they did an internship or they worked for a couple years in a job and then went to grad school and then joined. So I would say like it is possible to come right into it. I would say just think about it. Think about if that fits your kind of what you want to get out of your career and what you're hoping to do when you grow up. And by the way, you never figure it out. So you're always figuring out where you're going to be when you grow up, even when you're 15 years out of college. And I've talked to people closer to retirement. They're still trying to figure out what they're going to be. And we do internships as well. So McKinsey doesn't do a ton of recruiting at Florida. There's a couple of us that are in that are out of our Miami office and Atlanta office that are getting involved in recruiting at Florida. So hopefully you're seeing more and more of that. I'm working actively to try to get us connected, the engineering college specifically, but it's a small and mighty team. So I don't know what our status is for next year for the next recruiting season, but certainly we do internships and we also do and also take folks right out of undergrad. But like I said, my perspective to you is just think about if you'll get the right experience that you want in just going straight into consulting. Like certainly can be very rewarding, but I also just had fun in industry first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you've moved on from a number of companies, seemingly able to maintain positive relationships and connections. Do you have any advice for doing that well and successfully?
Sure. Yeah, so leaving your first company is pretty scary because it's the only job you ever know, and sometimes you're not sure you're making the right decision. I've seen people stay at companies too long because they were afraid to like make that jump. It's all about how and why, right? If you leave a company because you're just looking for a new opportunity and you do it gracefully, and it's very easy to maintain good relationships. Like if you quit when things are bad, right? Like you torpedoed a role and you're just walking out while everything's on fire. Like it's probably not a situation which you're going to salvage a lot of those relationships. So I'd say it's a lot about the timing of when you leave an opportunity and when and what you decide to do and how you message it. The other thing too is that, we go back to tying it full circle to the mentoring conversation before, right? The mentee is kind of on you. So you'd be surprised. You leave a company, and if you send someone a note on LinkedIn they used to work with like 5 years later, they're probably gonna be very happy to hear from someone. Like time has a way of erasing some of that stuff. So you forget, even if there was a little bit of tension, people are not gonna, they're not gonna remember that. They're gonna be excited that you reached out to them, and they're gonna be excited that that you're doing something cool and interesting. And I challenge you to do that if you are trying to stay in touch with people. It's really good to do it without an agenda. The worst thing you can do is, oh, somebody, I always get a message from them when they want something, right? If you can just reach out to someone, hey, I thought of you, just wanted to say hello, see how you're doing, and do that, maintain that relationship, then you never know, right? When they come around, and maybe they'll think of you when they have a job opportunity, or maybe you'll find an opportunity for them, or maybe you'll reconnect over some mutual shared interest. But I think it's all about kind of how you do it, and don't be afraid to just reach out to someone you worked with previously. I still keep in touch with people from my first internship, and we don't talk that often, but I never feel awkward even though I chose not to work there.
So looping back to going into consulting, right out of graduation, is what experience and traits do you want to see in students to be well qualified to jump into consulting right out of college or grad school?
Sure. So something I will say is that and this may help you, out of undergrad, a company like McKinsey is extremely competitive, right? Because think about it, you're going up against people from every undergrad and institution across the world, right? So you have to be really, really competitive, and you have to stand out. I think, of course, really high GPA, involvement, not just in College of Engineering, kind of, but beyond. But I think it's just making sure you're really well-rounded, and you've done a lot of different things, but not too much, right? You need to do something meaningful, right? So having 10 organizations on your resume looks impressive, but if you didn't really do anything and you barely showed up to the meetings, you didn't really make a difference in those organizations. It's about kind of, yes, you can have breadth, but make sure you have depth, and not just, hey, I was a member, but like I did something meaningful, right? I share that because I actually think it's a little bit easier to come in as an experienced hire, because my academic credentials are important, but they're not as important as what I've done in my last role, right? So I could have come from any university, and if I had, I was a director of something at a large company, I demonstrated that I held that job, and I, had a bunch of, a bunch of great, results there, and had some meaningful differences I made. I think that's actually more important to someone that's hiring you. And that's something I learned too, is, as you move away from college, the stuff that's on your resume, sort of as it falls to the bottom, it's more of what you've done in the last year or 2 or 3 years, not necessarily what you did 5 years ago. Like, that stuff's important, but like as you progress through your career, it's going to be more important what you most recently did. So I know that was a roundabout way of answering that question. So I'd say, yes, you have to be really well-rounded, and you have to demonstrate leadership skills. But I also say, don't get discouraged. Stuff like consulting is extremely competitive. If it is something truly you want to do, don't be afraid to try something different. Be a little bit more patient, and go out there and get it after you've got some experience that you can show, hey, this is really applicable, and I think I'd make a good consultant.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt. Many thanks for everyone in the audience. There are no more questions. I want to say thank you, Matt, for joining us and sharing your wisdom with all of us. And to everyone in the audience, thank you for joining our last session of this year's Gators Insights. I hope you all have a great summer.